Yo, welcome back to the MMA Fight Realm. It is your boy Chris, and I'm back with another picks and predictions video. This time for UFC 305, Dricus Du Plessis taking on Israel Adesanya in the main event. Hope you guys like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you guys think of these picks in the comments, and let me know your picks in the comments as well, man. Let's break it down. Leading off the card, we got Jesus Aguilar taking on Stewart Nicoll. To lead off the card, some flyweights. Stewart is the hometown kid making his debut in the UFC on a big pay-per-view. He's a strong grappler who is looking to finish his opponents. He's a very strong grappler, 8-0 with 7 finishes, 4 by knockout and 3 by submission. Not a lot of experience, but I do like that he isn't looking to lay and pray out there. He's going for the finish. He's also been 5 rounds before in the regionals, so you can show that he can push that pace and that forward pressure wrestle style for 5 rounds. He can strike. He's got decent calf kicks. His striking is definitely not his preference. He's looking to mix in his wrestling, and he's mixed in his wrestling and grappling against all of his past opponents. He's had a lot of success, but you have to consider the level of competition he's faced really just isn't that great. So he's fighting guys with either barely any experience or just bad records, and usually these are the fighters who would end up on a Contender Series or on an Ultimate Fighter scene before they make the UFC. But he does have a winnable fight here at home against Jesus Aguilar. Jesus Aguilar is a small, scrappy flyweight. He has heart, and he will make fights fun on the feet. We saw that against Shannon Ross. It really only took 1 punch. But Shannon Ross, not a very credible win there. Not a very credible knockout at this point, being that, who hasn't knocked out Shannon Ross at the UFC level? And, when it comes to getting taken down, he does not do the right things. That's just my thing about Jesus Aguilar, and that's why I do think this is a winnable fight for Stewart Nicoll. He's pulling guillotines instead of fighting the takedown. He's accepting bottom position sometimes, which really isn't a good look to the judges. And when he is trying to get up, he doesn't have the fight IQ to do it technically. It's more of just muscling his way up. I don't think he's gonna have much success doing that against a guy like Stewart Nicoll. Although he hasn't faced UFC competition, I think he can have success with his style in this fight. And you gotta ask yourself, how much has Aguilar improved his takedown defense in just 5 months? So that was the last time we saw him out there against Mateusz, where he gave up a bunch of takedowns, gave up a bunch of control time, and it was a very close fight. I think betting wise, you might want to stay away from the debut, from the guy making his debut. But since the line is starting to get wide and out, it's looking like maybe dog or pass. But for the pick, I'm gonna have to choose Stewart Nicoll here. I think Stewart is going to have to worry about that power on the feet, but I think he's gonna find the right entry, and he's gonna have a lot of success with the wrestling and grappling and get it done here by TKO or by decision. Next up, we got Kenan taking on Ricky Glenn. Interesting fight here. I was not expecting this to be on a pay-per-view card. Ricky Glenn, former featherweight and lightweight, now trying his chances at welterweight, and he's 35, so it could be that he just doesn't want to cut the weight anymore, just feels more comfortable to fight at 170. I wish the level of competition that Ricky Glenn has fought was a bit more notable, and I think against notable competition he's just losing, or even worse, he's getting finished. Against Christos Giagos, it only took 1 mistake, and when Giagos found the chin, Glenn he folded. And then against Drew Dober, right after the knockout loss to Christos Giagos, Dober, it was just clear, man. Dober had the power advantage. Dober had the quickness, the youth. It just looked like Ricky Glenn did not belong in that fight. And experience is great to have, and I think Glenn is well-rounded, but I don't think he's going to be. I don't think he's going to have the power to match up with a welterweight like Song Kenan. Song Kenan has shown his power even in his losses. 3 out of his 5 wins in the UFC are by knockout. He dropped Ian Gary in the first round while Gary was throwing a naked calf kick. And, he dropped Rolando Bedoya, who is very durable. We saw him not get dropped against Chaos Williams. And Song Kenan was able to pick up a decision win there against Bedoya. He was chasing the finish in that fight. That's another good thing that I like to see, especially, against a guy like Rolando Bedoya, who is younger than him. Now, I believe he will be a year younger than Ricky Glenn in this matchup. So I think, the one thing I can say that stands out to me is the lack of output by Song Kenan sometimes is really bad. The most significant strikes Kenan has ever landed in the UFC is 75, and that was his decision win over Rolando Bedoya, who, although he is durable, he is very hittable. We saw that even in his last fight, and that's something I don't think it's going to affect Song Kenan in this fight. His lack of output, being that his output will have power, and Ricky Glenn has just not been able to deal with power very well lately. But against guys like Ian Gary and Kevin Doucette, who are well distance managers, it's really no surprise that he's losing those fights by decision. And I think it's got a lot to do with that output issue. Despite the output, I do think that Kenan gets this one done. The power will be too much, and I think when Kenan lands, he's going to drop Glenn. I don't see the chin holding up at this weight class, and I gotta go with Song Kenan by knockout in this fight, man. Next up, we got Tom Nolan taking on Alex Reyes, and at this line, Alex Reyes just looks like the sacrificial lamb of the card against Tom Nolan. And this line definitely has some recency bias to it. Reyes 0-2 in the UFC, with both losses being by knockout, and he's 37, 2 months from 38. He took a long time in between those 2 fights. I believe it was 6 years. I think Nolan is the rightful favorite, being that we just recently saw him and he worked a knockout finish. But this line is ridiculous. I think Reyes, in his 2 fights, he looked very gun shy. He was lacking in head movement. His punches didn't look like they packed much power. I think he's got a puncher's chance, given that the chin of Tom Nolan is definitely questionable. Again, like you're paying for minus 1,200, whatever the line is now. Very questionable for a guy with a very questionable chin. I think, besides that, I don't really see how. Besides the puncher's chance, I don't really see how Alex Reyes wins this fight. Nolan is the faster of the 2, and Reyes, his chin is also questionable. Being knocked out in his past 2 fights, being that he's 38 years old, it's not doing him any. Almost 38 years old. It's not really doing him any favors though. Nolan by finish, I think, is the likely outcome in this fight. I think they're setting him up for a win. He did get dropped in that fight against Victor Martinez, and he got knocked out against Nicolas Mota. So is this a guy you want to be betting on at this price? Probably not, but I do think he is the one who gets this job done. So I'm going to go with Tom Nolan here, and I think he gets it done by finish. Next up, we got Jack Jenkins taking on Herbert Burns. Man, Jack Jenkins was supposed to fight Gavin Tucker. It was going to be more of a scrap here. But, Herbert Burns on a full camp tires out after the first round. Now, he's coming back on short notice after getting finished just 4 months ago against Julio Arce. He didn't go out cold. I will say that. He didn't go out cold, but he got dropped twice, and it was clear he didn't show any improvement in the stand-up. And it's just one-dimensional jiu-jitsu approach from a guy who has not had much success at getting fights to the ground. He will pull guard. He will try anything and everything possible to get fights to the ground. because, you know, he is just a huge liability on the feet. And, you know, Jenkins, he has well enough takedown defense. He's gritty. He's not going to accept being on his back if he is taken down. And, you know, nowadays, that's really all you need against a guy like Herbert Burns at this point. Herbert is 36. I don't think the cardio is going to improve. I don't think his approach is going to change. I think Jack is a great striker, definitely by far the better striker in this matchup. He mixes all of his shots very well, and he's not just a headhunter. He looks to set up, you know, one shot for the next, and he's mixing it in with calf kicks. He's even got calf kick finishes, I believe, you know, 2 or 3 of them. I think Jenkins is the rightful favorite, and I think he gets this one done, man. I'm not seeing much ways for Herbert Burns unless he can, you know, I would say Jenkins wins this fight 9 times out of 10. There's a chance that Herbert Burns can lock in a submission by taking the back or something, but it's just extremely rare at this point in his career and on short notice. We do know that he's got cardio issues. I think he will be live in the first round, but after that, Jack Jenkins should take over, and I gotta go with Jack Jenkins in this fight. I think he's aware of the dangers from a guy like Herbert Burns, and I think he's gonna get this one done by finish. So I'm going with Jack Jenkins. Finish in the 2nd or 3rd round. Next up, we got Luana Santos taking on Casey O'Neill. This should be a good fight. You know, both girls have not really beaten anyone high level, and you know that might be a little controversial take, being that O'Neill has a win over Roxanne Modafferi, but that was a 39-year-old Roxanne Modafferi who was already on a major decline, and you know she still took her to a split decision in that fight. And O'Neill, she's got an aggressive style. She's forward pressure all the time, and she mixes her strikes with some takedowns, but she doesn't mind getting hit in the process. And that did cost her bad against Ariane Lipski. On the ground is really where Casey O'Neill does her best work. All of her knockouts are by ground and pound. I think she's got 2 submission wins as well. In her losses, she's gotten, you know, heavily exposed for her defensive awareness. She's forward pressure all the time, but it's not without taking some punches. And when her fights stay standing, she lacks the power and to really earn the respect from her opponents, and they start to walk her down. You know, Jennifer Maia, another high-level opponent that Casey O'Neill fought, defended all of O'Neill's takedown attempts and was able to outstrike her, which got her the decision win there. Jennifer Maia definitely at the later stage of her career as well, but definitely high level. I would say that's one of the better competition that Casey O'Neill has fought compared to Luana Santos. And Lipski was able to outclass Casey O'Neill on the feet, just wasn't even close. She rocked Casey with a right hand and had her dazed, diving for legs, but it was Lipski who ended up on top and just ground and pounding her until she got the armbar finish. You know, I think Casey, I think she's decent, but if she hasn't shaped up her defensive issues, I can see her getting dropped and finished again by Luana Santos. Luana Santos, she was able to drop Maria Agapova before locking in a rear naked choke. She knocked out Juliana Miller in her debut. She's clearly shown that she's got power, and you know, she's very young, she's still improving. We saw some improvements in her striking in her last fight as well. It wasn't more like of the looping shots that many people talk about. It was straight shots that were getting it done against Maria Agapova. And again, not many opponents that stand out, but she's finishing these girls. And you know, she's making them look like they don't belong in there with her. She packs power, and she can match Casey in the grappling. In the grappling in particular. I'm not so sure about the wrestling. She did show good takedown defense against Stephanie Egger, another judo practitioner herself, but that's why, you know, Egger was looking for trips and foot sweeps. I think Casey will have a more traditional approach in terms of wrestling, and she's going to shoot singles and double legs. So it's going to be interesting to see how Luana holds up with the takedown defense against a more traditional wrestler. But I do think Luana will have the power advantage on the feet, And if she can match Casey in the grappling, then I can see Luana getting her hand raised in this fight. Even though she's taking this one on short notice, that's gonna be the pick for me. I know Casey is on a 2-fight losing streak and she's definitely in need of a win here, but Luana should be able to match Casey in all the areas that Casey does her best work. So I do think that Luana is gonna have to also watch out for the calf kicks coming from Casey, and she can't let them accumulate. Once it's not going Casey's way, I can see her being desperate and making mistakes like she always does. You gotta also take into account that 66% takedown defense by Casey O'Neill does not look good. So I do think Luana can have some success taking it to the ground if she wants to. The pick here is Luana. Santos by decision, man. I think she's got a good amount of advantages here. I think she can match up her opponent very well, and I think she gets this one done by decision. Next up, we got Josh Culibao taking on Ricardo Ramos. Two guys who fight like they don't like going to the judges. That's for sure, man. Ramos has 11 finishes out of his 16 wins, and for Culibao, 6 finishes out of his 11 wins. I think it's one of the better fights on the card, being that they both need a win. Both are on a 2-fight losing streak. Ramos got submitted twice by guillotine in his last 2, and if you watched it back, you can tell the fight IQ of this guy is extremely questionable. You know, he was piecing up Julian Erosa on the feet and decides to shoot for a takedown, which, you know, while he had him hurt, he had Julian Erosa hurt, and Erosa was able to lock in his patented guillotine. I gotta say patented now, because he was able to pull that same guillotine on Christian Rodriguez. I was heavy on Christian Rodriguez in that fight. Credit to Julian Erosa. But yeah, he got the guillotine finish on Ricardo Ramos. And then against Jourdain, he had top control on Jourdain while Jourdain was locking in the guillotine, and Ramos just did nothing about it. He didn't do anything about it until it was way too late. He was fully in the submission, and Jourdain gets the win there. Ramos, you know, he's well-rounded in all the areas, and I do rate his submission game. I do rate the submission game of Jourdain and Julian Erosa a bit higher than Culibao, but it was more of the fight IQ that stood out to me of Ramos that really is his detriment in his fights, man. He's very well-rounded in all the areas. I think his offensive grappling stands out the most. Half of, I believe, a good portion of his wins are by submission. His defensive grappling, easily one of the worst I've ever seen. And Culibao on a 2-fight losing streak, but it's to a surging undefeated contender, Lerone Murphy, who he did take to decision, and then Danny Silva, the newcomer, who happens to be very good and was able to mix it up enough to pick up a split decision win over Culibao. It was a very close fight. Culibao has only been finished once, and that was once in the UFC, and that was against Jalen Turner. That was Culibao's debut, which he took on short notice against a guy who can arguably fight at welterweight in Jalen Turner. So, you know, really, Culibao just had no business being there, but credit to him for seizing the opportunity. Culibao fights with his heart on his sleeve, so, you know, he will leave it all out there. I think he's well-rounded, but he prefers to keep the fight standing. Sprawl and brawl should be the strategy in this fight for Culibao. If he can keep it on the feet and land at a high rate, I can see him tiring out Ramos, who, you know, traditionally in his past fights has shown he does not have the best cardio. And Ramos, if he's able to get the takedowns like Danny Silva was against Josh Culibao, then I think Ramos is in the driver's seat for a potential upset here. But I think Culibao, still young, still improving, will get this one done, man. And he's fighting at home. I'm slightly leaning Josh Culibao here by late finish or decision. But, hey, I'm not mad if anyone is picking Ricardo Ramos here. I do think he's got all the tools to get the job done. But Josh Culibao slightly edging him in this fight to get this one done, man. I think Ramos's fight IQ is just what's always going to be his weakness, especially in these close ones. So Josh Culibao is the pick. Next up, we got Junior Tafa taking on Valter Walker. It seems like every pay-per-view needs a good striker versus grappler matchup, and in this pay-per-view we got two. You know, we got this fight, and then we got Gamrot versus Hooker in the main card, but this one will definitely be the one most are going to look over, because, you know, considering how Valter Walker and Junior Tafa have seriously underperformed since their arrival in the UFC. You know, Walker, he really dropped the ball against Lucas Brzeski in his debut, a fight where Lucas Brzeski seems to be a layup for majority of fighters nowadays, and Walker wasn't able to get it done there. And in that fight, Walker, he got to his game plan, which is the grappling. He worked, I believe, 7 minutes of control time along with 4 takedowns. He did show he is capable of executing his game plan, which is to wrestle, but now he's got to add damage, man. And, you know, I saw on Instagram he did slim down. He is improving his striking. He's working with guys like Bogdan Guskov and Sharaputin Magomedov. I think he's doing the right things to add to his tool set. And Junior Tafa, he is going to need to keep this fight standing, which is something that he hasn't really shown he's that good at. Just got torn up by calf kicks against Marcos Rogerio de Lima, and this is a former Glory kickboxer who I like. You know, going into that fight, I really didn't think he would have many issues with the calf kick, being that this guy's a former kickboxer. He should be well equipped to deal with calf kicks, should be well equipped to deal with the stand-up a lot better than he does, and he really does not, man. I think he has seriously underperformed, and he's going to need to keep this fight standing, and I just don't see how he does it. So, you know, I picked Valter Walker to get it done against Lucas Brzeski, and I gotta go Valter Walker again here in this matchup. I think he's doing the right things. Like I said, if you look at his Instagram, he slimmed down, which is telling me he's worked on his strength and conditioning, something that was exposed in his debut. He looked a little tired while trying to execute that wrestle for 3 rounds game plan. And hopefully it's not a lot of laying and praying. Hopefully he is looking to get a finish here, but I can see him having success at getting the takedowns and racking up the control time. So I gotta go Valter Walker here in this fight. I think he's the right I think he's a sneaky dog pick here, being that, you know, he underperformed in his debut. But Junior Tafa, I just don't see many ways that for him to keep this fight standing, and I think Valter Walker will have success. So I gotta go Valter Walker here, either by finish, TKO finish, or decision. Next up, we got the main card, and leading off the main card, we got Jingliang, the Leech, taking on Carlos Prates. Man, I'm a big fan of Jingliang, but I just cannot fade Carlos Prates against a guy coming off a 2-year layoff. And you know, the last time we saw the Leech, it was up against Daniel Rodriguez, and it was a war. It was really a war. He got outstruck in significant strikes, and I think honestly that's a bad look considering the trajectory of D-Rod's career now. You know, and we saw the Leech struggle with the reach disadvantage against Neil Magny. He was only able to land 16 significant strikes, and he wasted a lot of his energy trying to get a takedown. He was at an 8-inch reach disadvantage in that fight, and now in this one he's going to be at a 6-inch reach disadvantage against a guy with much more finishing potential than Neil Magny. I think Prates, I think he's the truth, man. You know, the fight against Trevin Giles definitely raised some eyebrows in the early rounds, but when he found his shot, he ended the fight, you know. And in his last one, he made quick work of Charles Radke in the first round, devastating knees to the body. He uses his height and reach very well, and he's only been to decision 3 times in his pro career. He's got 19 wins. All right, so I think that just goes to show Prates is a fight finisher, and I think he's legit, man. I'm picking him to get this one done by finish. I think it's a tough fight for the Leech to come back to, and if he could pull it off, then much props to him. But I think he will be a step behind in this fight, and being a step behind against a guy like Carl Prates will get you finished. So Prates by knockout is the pick here for this fight. Next up, we got Tuivasa taking on Jairzinho Rozenstruik. 2 heavyweights who, you know, from what they have shown us, they want nothing to do with the wrestling, and I think we are going to get a finish in this fight. It really has not looked good for Tuivasa, you know, on a 4-fight losing streak and finished on all 4 losses. I did pick Ty to get it done against Marcin Tybura. I thought he would be able to have success on the feet, and he did. He did have some success. He had Tybura hurt early, but it only took 1 takedown for Tybura to get the finish in that fight. And, you know, it's just every single time Tuivasa is forced to grapple on the ground, he just is severely exposed. You know, against Volkov, Tuivasa was destroying Volkov's lead leg. Again, he was having moments, but then Volkov, you know, turned the fight around with a knockdown late in the first round, and it was a trip by Tuivasa that Volkov was able to take advantage of, get the top mount, and finish Tuivasa by Ezekiel choke. So again, man, just another way that Tuivasa has shown he is just not capable of finding his way back up against these heavyweights. And Pavlovich, he put him away. He got 2 knockdowns. That was the fight where Tuivasa just got overwhelmed and outclassed, man, in that Sergey Pavlovich fight. Tybura, on top of being finished, Tuivasa, on top of being finished in his last 4 fights, he's also been knocked down 4 times in his last 4. It's really not a good look on the stats, and he's only getting older, so the durability becomes an even bigger question mark. And I think he's got a winnable fight here despite all these negatives that I mentioned, because he's got an opponent who will not be threatening takedowns. And when you choose to strike with a guy like Tuivasa, we even saw Cyril Gane get knocked down. We saw him chop up Volkov's calf. You know, he's having these winnable moments, but he's he's making these fighters pay the price when they choose to stand, and that is something that Rozenstruik is gonna have to be aware of. Rozenstruik, he's a great kickboxer for heavyweight, 8 wins in the UFC, all 8 of them by knockout, and he's just finishing these guys with what looks like an ordinary hook or an ordinary jab, but it's power behind it that ends these fights. Watching his fights over, I think Rozenstruik is sometimes doing too much waiting and not enough fighting, though. You know, against Gane, he was taking too many shots with nothing in return. If he doesn't pick up the output in this fight, I think he will get outstruck by Tuivasa, you know, who is in desperate need of a win, and he's gonna be coming forward. And Tuivasa, he's gotta hope his chin holds up in the process. He's gonna be looking to throw bombs. For the pick, I'm gonna have to side with Jairzinho Rozenstruik. I think he's a bit more durable than Tuivasa, and that is definitely what is needed when you're up against a guy like this, because Tuivasa is going to bring it. I hate picking against Tuivasa, but it's a spot where he's gonna have to show me in order for me to believe in the process, man, because he has not shown that he can deal with the power. He has not shown he can deal with the takedowns, despite it even not, you know, he might not even have to deal with one takedown in this fight. But even against Sergey Pavlovich, you know, when guys like Sergey Pavlovich throw caution out the wind and are able to finish him, then it's a recipe for disaster against a guy like Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who has good setups
for his kickboxing techniques. But we've also seen Francis Ngannou throw caution out of the wind and knock out Jairzinho. So we got a very interesting fight here. For the bet, you might want to go dog or pass, but for the pick, I got to go Jairzinho Rozenstruik by finish. I do think there's good value on Tuivasa, especially him being at home, not having to adjust to any traveling as well. It's a very fun fight for the heavyweight weight class. Next up, we got Mateusz Gamrot versus Dan Hooker, the last striker versus grappler matchup for the pay-per-view. But this one a lot more interesting, and a lot more interesting than Walker versus Tafa, obviously, considering that Gamrot, he's proven he's definitely top 10 material at lightweight, and Hooker, with his history of knockdowns and just overall highlights and grit, this fight is definitely going to deliver. I think the big thing to look out for in terms of stats is Hooker has several knockdowns. He's always looking to end the fight, and Gamrot, on the other hand, has amazing wrestling and is looking to keep Hooker on the mat. Hooker has decent takedown defense. I believe it's at 80%, but Gamrot has shown that it doesn't matter who you are, he will get you down. He took Arman Tsarukyan down 6 times. He's got 26 takedowns in just his last 5 fights. I think it's great, but it's definitely tough to watch. And the UFC is probably hoping Hooker can pull it off here at home, but I'm just really not seeing it, man. I think Gamrot is constantly working on his striking. The wrestling is elite, and he's proven top 10 talent, and I think he's the rightful favorite, even though the line is a little wide for a guy who has been knocked down 4 times in his last 5, one being in his very last fight against who we some commentators considered Rafael dos Anjos as not really at the UFC level anymore, yet he was knocking down Gamrot, a top 10 lightweight. And Gamrot, he did show good durability, but he was able to bounce back and do what he does best. But it comes to a point where that is going to fail you eventually. He's got great chin wrestling, he's got good mat returns. I hate to say it, but I do think that is what's going to get it done in this matchup. Gamrot, he's going to have success getting this fight to the ground, working the top control. I think there's potential that Gamrot can work a submission, being that Hooker will be trying everything and anything to get the fight back on the feet. I think he can make a mistake in the process, and Gamrot can take advantage of that. But and that's why I do see Gamrot being live for a submission here. But I think the likelier outcome is Gamrot by decision in this fight, man. I have to go Mateusz Gamrot. I think the grappling advantage is hard to deny, and he's working on his striking. He's a guy who works at American Top Team with Savages, so the striking will forever be improving, and he's got to be aware that he's got to improve on that defense. So hopefully he shaped it up a bit more for this matchup. I got to go Mateusz Gamrot here by decision. Next up, we got the co-main event. Another fun matchup, another great co-main event for this pay-per-view. I think this fight is going to deliver. Steve Erceg coming off a title shot 5-rounder where he came close to winning the belt, and it was a controversial win. He's looking to put on a performance that can make him undeniable for a rematch. And Kai Kara-France coming off a long layoff, looking to show hopefully some improvement, but more so that he's still worthy of being at the top of the weight class in terms of rankings. And Kai Kara-France, he's a great striker. He's got the city kickboxing style, and he can put you out with his right hand if he gets a good read or if you make a mistake. I think his best weapon by far is his right hand. That's no secret now at this point after 35 fights, which is pretty damn good for a guy who's only 31 years old. But he does have some flaws, man. He does not like pressure. We saw that against Brandon Royval. He didn't have an answer for all the forward pressure. He just had no answer, honestly. Royval turned Kai Kara-France, a striker, into a grappler, and Kai was shooting for takedowns. He got caught in a bad guillotine against Brandon Royval, and Brandon Moreno, it was the same. You know, he lost to the forward pressure and durability of Brandon Moreno, because Moreno, he did have to eat some shots in the process, but he just kept walking them down. And Kai Kara-France does not fight well on the back foot, but he's only 31. So, you know, even though he's taken a year off, he's still got, if he's got title ambition, then he's definitely been in the lab working on not just coming back, but improving. And against Erceg, I think that's going to be extremely tough to pull off. You know, Erceg, he is very well rounded. Even though he's yet to pick up a submission win in the UFC, half of his wins are by submission, and he's got fight-ending power to go with it. We saw that against Matt Schnell. He was able to put Matt Schnell away early with his boxing. You know, he's also shown that he's got a chin, because he did get caught a couple times himself. Watching that fight back, I thought he outclassed Matt Schnell, you know, before watching that fight a second time, and watching the fight back for the tape review of these two. Steve Erceg took some shots in that fight, man. He showed his durability. He's got a chin. And even against Alessandro Costa, he took some bad shots in the second round, but was able to find his way out of danger and earn himself the third round and win the fight. He outstruck Costa 74-54. Costa, he did land the right hand often, and that is concerning me, considering how good Kai Kara-France is at setting up his right hand and how powerful he is. But I do think Erceg is going to have some advantages in this fight in terms of being able to show his full skill set. You know, I think he's going to have to push the pace, show some wrestling and grappling in this fight. You know, if he can give Kai a bunch of different looks, he can definitely get a finish in this fight, and I think he's capable of delivering that, man. So I'm gonna pick Erceg in this one. I think he's got more tools than Kai Kara-France, and if he uses them, he can get a knockout or even a submission in this fight. It's unpredictable how Erceg is going to win this one by finish, but I do think by finish is what we're going to see here. So Steve Erceg is the pick, and I think he gets it done inside the distance, man. Next up, we got Dricus Du Plessis taking on Israel Adesanya in the main event. Hope you guys like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you guys think of these picks, man. This has to be easily one of the better main event fights of the year. Dricus undefeated in the UFC and currently on a 9-fight winning streak overall, with 7 of them by finish. He's looking to show why he's the champ, and he's looking to show if he's elevated his game, you know, since becoming champion, which is something, you know, we have seen many times in the past. He's never in a boring fight. Dricus is high pace. He's a high-paced brawler with finishing power and capable of giving multiple looks to his opponents. You know, I did pick him against Sean Strickland. I thought because of that ability to change the direction of where the fight was going at any given point, that was going to give Dricus a good advantage going into that fight. And it was a close one, but I did score rounds 2, 3, and 4 for Dricus. I thought he did enough to win those rounds, and I thought he did enough to become champion. So, you know, also the way he put away Whitaker in the second round, starting it off with a stiff jab that led to a knockdown and eventually the finish in that fight. I think Dricus in his last 5 wins has also gotten 14 takedowns, and I do think the striking defense, you know, it could sharpen up, but this guy does not back down from a brawl, and he will change the direction of the fight at any point in time that he chooses to. and he's got a positive striking differential. So, you know, he's the one landing more often than not. At 30 years old, he's still got a lot of time to improve and hone in on his skill set, while Adesanya, on the other hand, is now 35 and really looking to prove that he's quote unquote he's back. You know, phenomenal striker Adesanya is. He's a phenomenal striker with sneaky power if you make a mistake, and lots of kickboxing experiences. So he's managing his distance very well while being able to find opportunities of his own at the right time. So, you know, credit to Adesanya, who, you know, he was once on a 12-fight winning streak with 6 title defenses. Maybe it was him being overworked, but I thought Adesanya looked a step behind in that fight against Strickland. I know he got hurt bad in the first. It could be that he never was able to clear the cobwebs from the first round knockdown, and that's going to be a huge concern, not just for this fight, but for any fight, because, you know, I think Adesanya is only getting older. He's a great striker. We have seen him getting taken down before. He's found his way up, but he doesn't fall to the pressure, and I think there's definitely a lot riding into this fight for him. There's a lot of pressure, considering this could very well be his last title shot. You know, he's 35. If he loses this, there's no doubt he's gonna have to go on a winning streak to even be considered in those title shot conversations again. And with all that being said, I still lean Dricus Du Plessis in this fight. I like the wrestling upside, and I think the power on the feet is going to match up well. You know, Dricus, he will have to be the one pushing the pace, because Adesanya will be content to stay on the outside and just point fight his way to a decision. We've seen that before, and this is one of those where I believe Dricus is different. I just think he will make that switch. He's going to apply the pressure, and when he needs to get this fight to the ground, he's going to, man. I think he's gonna do everything he can do possible to get his hand raised in this fight, and I think he wins this fight by decision or by knockout. You know, I can see him definitely getting a knockout. Those are really the two outcomes that I see in this fight. He can definitely earn himself a decision win by racking up the control time and ground and pound, but Adesanya, like I said, there's a lot riding into this fight for him. So, you know, he could be at a kill or be killed style, and that's just also a recipe for disaster against a guy like Dricus, who has power and can change the outcome of a fight at whatever moment, man. So I do think Dricus Du Plessis is the one that's going to get this one done, and I think it's and still this Saturday. So hope you guys like the picks. Those are my picks for UFC 305, man. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I know I say it in these past 2 fight cards that I was supposed to do a preview with Pick'em, but this time for sure it's a pay-per-view, no doubt about it. We're gonna be doing a preview Saturday morning before the fight start. Hope you guys tune in. We're gonna give our final predictions and our bets for the card, and yeah, that's it, man. Hope you guys like, comment, subscribe. I'm out of here. Peace.